Hey everyone, it is not mind rolling. It is I, Raghu, but I get to share today a podcast with Sita Ram Das, old friend, and one of Ram Das's caretakers from way back in the day, part of the group Kripa. Welcome.
Thanks, man. Yeah, no, I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, wait, I've got to mention something that is important, they tell me. It's an important announcement. We're going to have a Ram Das. Speaking of Ram Das, we're going to have a course, and this is presented by Love Serve Remember Foundation, which is my other hat. And it is an 8-week course that's just integral to, as complete as one could possibly get in 8 weeks, Ram Das's core teachings. And it's in commemoration of the 50th anniversary of Be Here Now, which is this year, 2021. It was published in 1971. And we're doing a lot of different things, but this is so, I think it will be helpful for a lot of people. It just puts out all the material curated. Ram Dass would talk about similar themes from lecture to lecture, and they recorded all of them. I mean, it's extraordinary, right, how much of that we have. And but there were some days that he was like, oh, so right on, or he was in a certain feeling, and it was more meditative or something. So anyhow, these are all curated along those lines, and it's a pretty great experience. Go to ramdas.org/life course, which is what this is. So it's an 8-week course. Go there. It'll give you everything. There's teachers every week, and there's going to be movement, yoga and movement, and practices on another night alongside of wonderful interaction with everybody, doing breakout rooms on Zoom and talking about the material. Also, From and For God is Sita Ram Das's book that just came out. And you'll have all of the links and so on that'll be in the show notes on this podcast. So, and we're there's a few things in here, more than a few, actually. You really got to a bunch of there's essays and poems and so on. It's really wonderful. And you do come to some very salient points around the path and around what we're going through now. So it really addresses a lot. So there was a lot for me to think, oh yeah, let's talk about that. It was really cool. But we got to go way back, because people need to know a bit of your story and how you met Ram Dass. But even before that, what were the things, like Ram Dass's new book, memoir, Being Ram Dass, it's all of his experiences basically that were reflected through the light of Neem Karoli Baba, and how he saw his entire life as being a succession of things that were quite well organized for him to get to go through the whole Harvard thing, go through the psychedelic thing, go to India, get that roadmap of consciousness, and come back and share it all. So, we all have that story, and what's yours?
Yeah. It's interesting. One thing, too, that maybe I'll tie in when I tell my story, but something that I've been reflecting on recently as the 50th anniversary of Be Here Now comes out, is that when I was a caregiver at Ram Dass's is when you all had organized that small 40th anniversary get-together.
Oh, 2010 was when you came aboard?
Yeah, I hadn't been at the house that long then. And I remember you and Krishna Das and KK Saw and
oh yeah.
And Parvati actually was collecting stories for her book, and I got to be like in the room manning the camera as she was like interviewing some of the people. So I remember that. But even before that, I mean, what drew me to Ram Dass in the first place, like, as you once told me when I first kind of told you my story way back when, you said, that's the same thing that happened to us, where I found Be Here Now, and it just felt like it was speaking directly to me. I was probably like 20 years old at the time. And I've been experimenting with psychedelics. I mean, that was definitely my first foray into the spiritual path. And then just started reading different spiritual texts. And with most of them, I felt like I was kind of having to do some translation, to kind of just dig underneath, like look past different cultural things or historical aspects. But when I read Be Here Now, it was just like it was speaking right to me. And that led me on a journey of slowly kind of just gravitating to more and more of Ram Dass's books and coming across Miracle of Love. And at some point, I mean, it really just, it felt like just this wild thought. I was thinking about all the people that really inspired me, who I'd love to have met, people like Aldous Huxley or whoever. And I realized that the person at the top of that list that I want to meet more than anyone was Ram Dass, and that he was still alive. And so I just thought, why not put in a good effort to try and meet him?
Wait, now before that, though, let's go back.
Sure.
Before. What even dawned on you that there was some other, shall we say, reality that wasn't what our conditioning and our karma suggested, especially after we got into the whole separation thing, after they gave us a name, and me. So, yeah, what happened to even, there's always something that introduces the idea that there is something beyond the me, senses, ego, mind, blah, blah.
Yeah. That's interesting too. In fact, that was one of the things I was reflecting on when reading, Ram Dass's memoir, which, it is incredible. But just thinking about how, sometimes we view past events a little bit differently, with time. And when I first got into the spiritual path, I mean, I really felt like it was just a hunger to kind of know, like, what is the truth? And I still think that was true, but I also, looking back now, I see how much pain that there was, just in that sense of me and my identity and not being good enough. And just, there was all sorts of suffering. And I was constantly at that time kind of running from myself in different ways through drugs and alcohol and different distractions. I fundamentally at my core, didn't feel okay. But I also had the programming that it wasn't okay to admit that you didn't feel okay. So even in the beginnings of my spiritual path, I didn't really allow myself to fully see how much pain was kind of driving the way. But it really was psychedelics that first opened up those cracks of just something else. And at first, I didn't even know what that something else was, but it was enough of a crack that it allowed me to start to even entertain the possibility of some spiritual reality, to start to read these spiritual texts, because I was essentially raised agnostic, very scientific materialist. And that was kind of my core worldview. So yeah, it was really those psychedelics that opened up a possibility of there being something else. Yeah.
There's a long line on that one. And Be Here Now. I mean, it's amazing. It just goes on week to week to week of people. Well, they write into the foundation going, well, God, I got to talk to her. Is there a place I can meet up with like-minded people? I just took some mushrooms and read Be Here Now. Going, that sounds like somebody would say that in 1969 or something.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. Amazing. All right. Well, now we got to hear, how did you actually get over to Maui and meet him? And of course, I'm familiar, but I bet there's parts that I have forgotten. So let us know.
There probably is. And I remember, too, there was this sense of, while Ram Dass was living, I felt reluctant to kind of share parts of my story because it really involved me just deciding I was going to go there and meet him without having any connection. And that didn't feel like the kind of thing I just wanted to put out in the world as being okay to do. But now that there's not as much of a danger.
Right. Right.
But that's I had to meet him, and I told my friend this, and he said it. I still remember the moment he said, "Well, why don't we just fly to Hawaii and just meet him right now? Like, let's just do it." And we looked at plane tickets, and I still remember the amount. It was round trip for $260, which from Seattle, where I was living at the time, which there's nothing even close to that window either before or after this specific date. And it was just far enough out that I could probably get the time off of work. And we were just so caught up in the moment that we just bought the plane tickets on the spot. And shortly after that, reality definitely sunk in, and I started to realize just how just nonsensical that idea was. So I started to do a little bit more research, and ramdas.org, and I wrote into the foundation. At that point, I found the route for the heart-to-hearts that he was doing, and so I wrote into that. And at that point, it was Mike Kroll who was fielding those emails. That's how your organization has grown quite a bit since when I first wrote. But I didn't get a response at first. And so I just thought, okay, well, so I kind of started to think about other ways to rationalize the trip. Oh, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. But something else happened around that same time, which is that I was obsessively listening to Krishna Das on Pandora. This was before Spotify or any of that, Pandora Radio. And I had no idea that they knew each other, that they had the same guru. I didn't know any of that. No, I had no idea. So I'm reading, at this point, I'm reading Miracle of Love. I don't remember what percentage of the book, but that was the Ram Dass book I was on. I'm listening to Krishna Das all the time. I have this plane ticket. It's already purchased. It was for the beginning of June of that year. And I got so hung up on the bus story, which I know you know really well, and people listening know really well. And I still don't know why, out of all the stories in that book, that was the one that I was just like, I don't know about this. And I was finding myself thinking about it all the time.
Let me just, how about I give a core thing? I won't tell the whole story. It's way too long, but basically it's a story Ram Dass would tell about being in India and moving from a meditation course to, well, eventually to Delhi, which is where he was going, and being suddenly the thought and the word from somebody else to make a left-hand turn. They had not known where Maharaji was at that time. I wasn't at that course. So that's why they had been doing these crazy amount of meditation courses, because they couldn't find him. So that stopping point for Ram Dass, where he thought, I don't know, I want to go to Delhi. I can get an ice cream and, be really nice, warm bed after all that austerity stuff. So the idea is that, of course, he did make that left turn, and then he did meet Maharaji with this whole group of people, and found that Maharaji had woken up in the morning, or they had woken up, and he told the people in the house, Dada Mukherjee's house, 28 people, whatever it was, 28, 30 people are coming, prepare breakfast or lunch, whatever it was. And then they met him, and he brought them back to the house. And when Ram Dass found that out, so this is the core of the thing. Really? I was making a decision? Really? What is really going on here? That's the beauty behind that, because we are every day. I had a great mentor who you know of, K.C. Tiwari. Krishna Das talks about him a lot. I don't know how many times he would come up. He was like, you wanted to just be with this man. And every day it was all mindfulness. You imagine having somebody completely present every day, and it was just incredible. But he'd come to me and say, my boy, if you think you're doing it, you are lost. Oh, right. Oh, right. So that's what that story is. If you think you're doing it, you are lost, including thinking you're making major decisions. Not that you, but of course we have this beauty of the ego and the mind. They're good servants, and we do things every day, and hopefully come from the right place. But yeah, wait a minute. So how did that story get you? Like,
Yes. So I'm glad you told the story, and I like the Casey Torrey quote because it definitely this was this moment for me. So the plane ticket's already bought. No one from the foundation has got back to me. I'm feeling like the whole idea is just crazy. And I watch, and I'm listening to Christian Ross all the time. I don't know that he's connected at all. And then I watched Fierce Grace for the first time. And I don't remember if it was in the bonus features or in the movie itself, but in that movie, there's a clip of Christian Ross telling the bus story.
oh,
And it was just this moment of just, okay, Christian Ross has the same guru and he was on that bus. And I don't know. And it was in that moment, I felt like it was going to work, that I was going to meet Ram Dass. And after the movie ended, I looked up to see when Christian Ross might be coming to Seattle next to do a kirtan. I'd never seen him. And he was scheduled to come the day before I'd already bought my plane ticket to leave to go to Hawaii. And I still remember that moment. It just became very apparent that there was just other things going on.
yeah, right. Something's happening here, but we don't know what it is.
We do not know.
Mr. Jones.
And so I wrote again, and I did get a response back, and it was very formal. I'm sure it had been well practiced at that point. Your message has been passed on. As you know, Ram Dass is very busy with his schedule, and he's very focused on his healing. But if there's time, they may contact you. But I just
Who wrote
knew
that letter?
That was Mike Crawl.
Oh, okay.
Maybe you sent it to him.
No. I wasn't working with the foundation then. Well, no, 2010 I just started, actually. Yeah.
I think you were, because I do remember that summer. Well, anyway, I'll tell the rest of the story. So I go and I meet Ram Dass and I tell him my whole story, and he just simply says, well, no one comes in front of me unless Maharaji sent them. And, I didn't fully understood what that meant. I don't think I still do, but I've definitely started to see it as, one of Ram Dass's gifts is he just invited people into that worldview that he lived in of Guru Kripa. And then, he said, if you happen to be back on island, because I asked, well, I didn't ask, my friend did, but it was my idea. He said, Ram Dass, we want nothing more than to just be as close to you as possible. So if any work you need done around the house, we'll come do it. And Ram Dass said, well, we always need help with something. If you were on island, maybe there would be something you could do. But for me, that was enough. And then I flew back to Seattle and settled all my stuff. And then this is where you tie in a little bit. So there was this small window of time in the beginning, I think when you just come on, where Love Serve Remember was kind of creating their own like social media, almost Facebook platform. Do you remember that?
Yeah. I mean, that was actually, yes, Rita actually was the one who got us going in the whole digital world, really.
And so I remember writing something, just kind of telling a little bit about my story and you commenting. And I remember that blew my mind, just someone from Love Serve Remember that was there and, like commenting on my thing. I remember that actually. But and so then I came back to Hawaii. I found some guy in Paia for a while that would let me pay him a little bit of money to sleep on his back porch. And I started showing up at the house as a gardener. I was just a gardener for a while. And then eventually they had asked me to move in. So that is my meeting Ram Dass story.
Kind of the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
Do you ever think of it that way? I remember because when I didn't really have that thought with Ram Dass, but when I met Neem Karoli Baba, I had that thought, oh, okay, it's over now. Just going to have to figure out how to live through all this karma I've created, past lives and now, and this is the end, as the door said. Well, I met Sitaram Das then, probably in 2010, I would imagine, because we were there for a bit in that summer.
Mm-hmm.
And then in successive years, you were there for several years, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was on island total for 3 years.
Yeah. And that was at a time when things really started to change in terms of the amount of people that were coming to Maui to meet Ram Dass or come to these retreats. And it got, and as he aged even further, he needed more help and so on. And he was very, very specific about the kinds of people he wanted to hang out with on a day-to-day basis, and which was one of the most basic things was the referential attitude and that people use to separate themselves from what they think is higher. And he didn't like that. He wanted to be right here with everybody and bring all of your humanity with you, and at the same time live on that other plane. That was such a basic thing. You can live on more than one plane of consciousness at the same time. And you quickly got, in my eyes, into that program. And how about before, there's a couple of things I want to talk about, just different points of view, that some of the points of views in the book. But just a couple of little, so Sita Ram Dass, there's a lot of moments of just sitting with Ram Dass when nobody was around.
Yeah.
And we all did it at different times, and it was quite beautiful because you immediately got into a place where you didn't think you had to speak. You had to interrupt any of what the flow in the now was. And then all of a sudden, these little crystals of magic would come through just in hanging out with somebody who, let's say, was a little further along the line in terms of not being caught in self-seriousness and believing in our thoughts, all of it. So, give us something.
Yeah. Well, the first thought that comes to mind is just to reinforce kind of what you said, that I don't know that silence has ever been as rich in terms of just the silence that I experienced around Ram Dass. Just like totally just that sense of just being okay, not talking. And then because that was so rich, then seeing my own neurotic things come up, like, oh, maybe I should tell a joke, or maybe, but it just made it easier to see that stuff, around him.
Yeah.
There's just little things like, you talked about, with Tawari, imagine being with someone that was just so present moment. I mean, I was never around Tawari, but that's kind of how I felt about Ram Dass. I remember one time, because, with the aphasia and other things, sometimes his sense of time also wasn't so great. And this happened a few different times where he would come down for dinner and it was like way early. Like he just got confused about the time. And I remember one time going down, it was on the back patio, and I said, Ram Dass dinner isn't for an hour. He said, oh, really? I said, yeah. He said, okay, well, I'll just sit here. I was like, okay, do you need anything? He said, no. And I went up and I was helping with dinner or whatever. I didn't do that much to help. I was mostly just chit-chatting with the people cooking. But, I'd peer out in the window and I'd see him, and he wasn't like meditating like the way that I might meditate, where I'm like trying, and he was just there. He was just sitting there and he was just staring out at the ocean. And to me, he just seemed completely content. Like he could have been upstairs sitting, but he was down there. And so that's what he was going to do. And yeah, just little moments like that, just really, it's a lot of the little things that have kind of stuck out in my mind.
Mm.
The other thing, as you brought up, like being there at the house day in and day out. I mean, I don't want to say all my projections fell away, because I think I project about everyone all the time, but a lot of the projections did, in terms of seeing, Ram Dass as some glowing being on a stage, right? I mean, I definitely saw him as a human, but that's what deepened this so much for me, is because even with his humanity, and of course, even his teachings, Ram Dass was always so honest about that. That sense of present moment awareness, and also that sense of love, as Ram Dass taught a lot about loving awareness, it was real. I mean, I saw that Ram Dass really did actively practice and rest in that space of loving awareness, where when he said that he loved his wheelchair and the pain in his body or his dark thoughts, right? I mean, that was real. That was a real deep standpoint that he lived from. And the fact that that could shine through in the midst of his humanity, it just gave me hope for myself. And it definitely strengthened my faith in the path.
Beautifully said. Yeah. I could say I would have said the same thing after I first heard him and then met him. It was such a relief that, oh God, it's okay. It's okay. And within that okay, that other ineffable, you can't explain thing happens. And that's such a key thing, huh?
Yeah.
And, well, one fantastic thing, and what endears Ram Dass to so many, is his capacity for self-inquiry and honesty, and being able to share that in a way that very few people have, and communicate it in a way that so full of humor. I mean, we used to call him, he was the Lenny Bruce of spiritual talks, back in the day. And, but the reality of him coming through, as a psychologist, and all of the work he did around the mind, and all of the work on psychedelics, with psychedelics. So that offering was there, and it's something that maybe you can give me feedback from where you think this is, related to the fact that I believe that really part of this legacy of these teachings is around the combination of that open heart perspective of loving awareness, bhakti, and discriminating wisdom. And he really represented that discriminating wisdom in the way that, this whole course I described when we first got on has nothing but that. I mean, it's just a way to give us a different perspective, to move away from that belief system that we have in our stories, basically. And that's such a so it's sort of the combination. It's a weird combo of Hindu and Buddhist representation, really. That's why all these Buddhists were at our retreats in Maui. I've said that many times. That wasn't an accident. Yes, they were all good friends of ours, and of course Ram Dass, but that thing that's happening behind all of this, there was a reason. And I really believe strongly that that's a wonderful combo. Have you ever thought of it in those kind of terms, in terms of?
Yeah, well, I mean, even Ram Dass, even when he explained loving awareness, I mean, I've heard him talk about, awareness from his Buddhist background, and then the love from his devotional background. But I also think, that sense of that discriminating wisdom, and also just Ram Dass's sharp intellect in general. When I listen to his talks, I mean, there's all these different lenses that I can view them from, but one lens that I think has been really interested in viewing a lot of his talks, especially when he talks about Guru Kripa specifically, which every time he brings it up, you can almost sense this reluctance, and there's this sense of essentially, I think because so many of us in the West have been kind of turned off from what we see as religious practices that, overtly kind of devotional oriented practices, they seem kind of maybe woo-woo or superstitious or less than. And Ram Dass's ability to kind of state that path with the discriminating wisdom and with all of these other, psychological factors and things. I mean, he was really creating a framework where people like me, who are definitely hardwired that way with those biases, could start to allow myself to kind of open up into that. And I think that is a true gift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, some of the things that you bring up in the book are all around spiritual discrimination or discrimination that allows us to connect with a truth through intuition, which you also talk about. And one of these things is around how we walk around with certain beliefs that we have that your thing is around masquerading as truth. Yeah. What prompted you to even to think of it? I'm thinking more, these things, as soon as I read them, I think of my own example and I've had so many beliefs over the years and being absolutely right. Okay. Oh, oh God.
That's something you and I share.
Yeah. We all share that. One funny thing I'm just remembering, and this is like very small. It's not about any grand philosophical thing. It's actually was a health thing. Ram Dass got hepatitis in India. And I had it previously and had all of the recipes for the right way to deal with this and what you need to eat and do and the whole 9 yards. And I went over to give him that download as he was lying on the floor with a thin mattress in Allahabad. And as I went over there, another satsang brother, Kabir, was there. He was doing exactly, except completely different story. All of what he was advising was just his story, was his belief system around this. And I sat there, I watched, and I go, holy shit, I did the same thing. I want to do the same thing. And look where we are caught. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, all of these writings, it's really, when I say that it's a core practice of mine, it's kind of how I wrestle with these things. And specifically what prompted that one was, when I left Ram Dass's house, right? There I am, I'm with my spiritual teacher and everything's kind of taken care of. And I was doing a lot of, practice and all of the work was clearly connected to him in some sense. So, I was living a, quote, spiritual life. And when I left, it was a conscious choice that I'd made. And it was in large part because I met my partner, who I'm still with. And so after leaving, I had this running story of just that I had left behind my spiritual life and that I was becoming more worldly. And it caused me a lot of, unnecessary suffering. It was just added layer on top of everything. And it was so thick that, at one point when life was really hard and was struggling to pay the bills and, we were fighting a little bit, my solution was that I needed to leave all of that and I needed to go to the Taos ashram in Taos, New Mexico, Neem Karoli Baba temple. I contacted the manager at the time and he had talked to Hanuman Das, I remember, and it was like all approved. I could go there and do seva, and my bus ticket was bought, and I was sure of it, and it because I was connected to spiritual truth, I knew that that's what I needed to do to get back on the path. And it was the simple words, from my girlfriend. She just said, I feel like this is a cop-out. I feel like you're doing this just because life is hard right now. And I felt this crack, and I knew that she was right. And my ideas about the spiritual path, our ideas about that truth aren't the same. And I think this is true for a lot of us, especially those of us who have had openings from psychedelics, because those experiences are so strong and because everything happens so quick. I think we don't notice how quick our mind comes in to kind of put a belief around whatever that was. And we take that belief and we mistake that to be what that ineffable opening was. Whereas if we can hold that loosely, it's been my experience that every time I come back to that non-dual truth and catch a glimpse or a whiff of it, it refines my understanding, and that these kind of rigid holdings, they don't actually serve anything but just preventing me from kind of constantly recalibrating myself to that.
The gigantic defense mechanisms that we get used to them too, and they're comfy.
Yeah.
Because we want to be comfy. So that's a great story. One of the things that I like to talk about a lot, and you talk about faith in the book, and you also talk about trust. I encourage people to start out here, and trust is a much more navigatable term in my mind. Faith is like out there, religious. It's what? You can't pinpoint it, and and it's been associated with a lot of killing, wars.
Yeah.
But trust, okay. So, I think in here, you say trust in our deepest self. And what feels right may seem as it comes from somewhere else, as if what we are supposed to do is somehow different than what we want. Right? This is very astute. But when we start to talk about trust in our deepest self, the best way to explain any of this is personal experience. The only way. And 1 billion times I've said the first moment, this is going to be a Ram Dass podcast, because Sita Ram Dass and I that's how we're connected, basically. And it's in a happy moment. I've actually done a number of podcasts, Sita Ram Dass, with just different people who were some older friends, Jack and Trudy and Sharon and like that, and Joseph. And they were so delightful because everyone had a different view. But underneath all of it was only one thing, that love. Only one thing. So it's great. But I looked in those eyes the first second that I met him in Montreal and felt this field of completely feeling embraced vibrationally, and no judgment, no nothing, and nobody wanting anything. So they talk about, that movie we made, Becoming Nobody. It's just exactly that. No Richard, no Ram Dass. I was the only thing that was manifest. Everything else was just a space in which I could just completely be here now. It was in that moment. But I had gigantic trust because I hadn't had that experience, maybe with my mom when I was very young. And that trust led me all the way to Neem Karoli Baba, who one of the first thoughts I had when he actually burst out of the doorway in Kenchi was, oh shit, that's what Ram Dass was about, and we, many of us have that, didn't need Maharaji in a body or not, of course. But that's the trust. And you get that trust through I mean, you were listening to Krishna. Some trust was being engendered just by virtue of that. And it's music, it's kirtan, it's reading a book, meeting a teacher. There's so many psychedelics. All of it engenders this kind of trust in that ineffable place, right?
Yeah. And, for me, it's interesting because, right, like I didn't meet, a Mahasiddha in the body, right, like you all. But I did meet all of you, and it's interesting what this sense of trust, because from being around Ram Dass and from hearing all of the dinner conversations of you and Krishnadas and Radha and Parvati and just all of the amazing people, and just hearing all these stories, it deepened that sense of trust, that this is real, that this path that had been given to you all, that it works, and that it's real, and that we can walk it. And being around Ram Dass especially, and seeing the depth of his consciousness, and the fact that all of you said that you don't have to meet Neem Karoli Baba in the body to have a relationship with him, that sense of trust is what allowed me to just take those steps, right? Because I think that's what you're talking about, is trust doesn't have to take knowledge. We don't have to know if this is real or not. It's just a willingness to kind of just take that next step on the path and see what happens.
Yeah.
And that's what I gained from all of you. And I think that's incredible, is that trust in another person doesn't require them to be perfect, some fully cooked being.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the trust that manifests as a something. We don't know what to call it. Deep, deep, deep feeling. Something behind our minds.
Yeah.
It's impossible to really try and explain it. And that is why once that happens in my mind, then there's something about faith, which it expands into this place that you don't need to know. You have something in this book, Radical Uncertainty, is really important as well. But yeah, that to me is the core of what it is that you can breathe, suddenly start breathing a little bit easier, right?
So a conversation I had with Mirabai Starr, actually. So this was, Rita had organized a showing of Ram Dass's film, and it was a gathering in Santa Cruz. It was a memorial for Ram Dass, and Kripa was invited to do the kirtan, and Mirabai Starr was there, and she spoke, and Hanuman Das spoke. So after, there was a small gathering and at Rita Green's house, and we were talking in this concept of this discussion about faith and belief and the difference. It kind of came up in the communal discussion just for a little bit. And I said my piece, which was, that I've found, it's been my experience, that faith and doubt can coexist. And Mirabai Starr said something really interesting. First, she said, "Oh, that's totally right." And, Mirabai Starr has this way of saying things that make you feel totally seen. And so I'm like feeling really good. But she followed it with something that has really stuck with me. She said, and I would add that they actually have to, that doubt and faith have to go together. And that I think that really illustrates the difference of what we're talking about, is that, doubt is a mechanism of the mind that brings us to that discriminating wisdom. It's what helps us see what kind of beliefs have kind of attached themselves to that faith that might not be serving us anymore. Because that faith it's a non-rational, it's a non-intellectual thing. It's this depth of knowing that's a not knowing. It's just that depth of presence, and any of our ideas around it, they should be open to inspection. And, even in this kind of vaccine debate, a lot of people are using this idea of faith, like their faith in God, as a reason why they shouldn't get a vaccine. That level of discussion, that cuts off any type of, you can't discuss after someone says that. Yeah. So it's, that sense, doubt and discriminating wisdom and faith, and it really does all work together. And as the faith grows, this has been my experience, my ability to inspect even spiritual concepts, it gets easier because it's not based on those concepts anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, you mentioned, the people like me that met the Siddha Neem Karoli Baba, and that you didn't. I thought you did, though. You did. You told me that you dreams, one particular dream, and it's in the book too.
Yeah.
I remember you telling it, though, about being a puppet, and a puppeteer was...
Oh, you remember that.
There is, okay, I'm going to say it because people ask Siddhi Ma, everybody out there, Siddhi Ma, Maharaji, thank God, left us this Durga, the goddess Durga, as a human who is really our human mother, Indian Ma, as well as who she was deep behind personality. And she would say, because people would ask about dreams, and she would say there is no difference whatsoever between people who saw Neem Karoli Baba physically and people who had a dream about him either before or after he left that particular body. So I can't tell you how many people have described dreams to me where they seem to me no different, just the body, what it looked like, the positioning of his arms and the way he did all that back, completely double jointed kind of thing, just little details. It's not a scientific survey, but she said that, and that's my experience as well.
Yeah, I mean, right, as you talk about this sense of trust and growing in the faith, I mean, it's now my core worldview. Neem Karoli Baba is my guru, and he just has my heart. And yeah, no, I mean, there's no question that he is in my life and just running the show. And yeah, but the ability to allow ourselves to be open to that. I mean, that's why I like you bringing up that sense of trust. I mean, it really did come from, interactions with other people, and I mean, that's why satsang is such a powerful aspect of the spiritual path. I mean, especially since Ram Dass left his body, the importance of satsang for me has just grown so large, because when I'm with other devotees or when I'm with you right now, and just, even just bringing in these names and talking about this, I mean, it brings up that presence more towards the surface. I feel like it's one of the most powerful practices I have, is just being around other people in the satsang.
Yeah. Buddha said the same, right?
Sure.
One of his disciples came and said, so what's most important? There's the three vows, refuge in the Buddha, refuge in the Dharma, and refuge in the Sangha satsang community. And you would expect, or at least I expected Buddha to say, well, in the Buddha, and it's in the Sangha. So, and that presence, and by the way, let me just, I said that thing to you, which Siddhi Ma said to people, to us in Kenchi a long time ago, around darshan, dream, darshan, physical plane, not different. And the same reality is that presence that you just described. There is only one thing going on, and Maharaji said that to us every day, Sabek, there's only one, and that means that one thing. Some people get it manifested by an old man in a blanket, or the 16th Karmapa, or whoever is of that that grouping they call siddhas.
Right.
And that is just a universal. They are not separate. In fact, my favorite story is I went to see the 16th Karmapa physically in Los Angeles in a black hat ceremony when I got anywhere near him, 6-8 feet from him. I had this blast of the same experiential behind it all thing that I had with Neem Karoli Baba. And I went, holy shit, really? Oh, wait, there's only one thing going on here. And those that are in that beyond duality place and still in a body express that. And so it's as Surya Das, Lama Surya Das likes to call it, the big Maharaji.
Right.
So that's what we're talking about.
It's also interesting to me, there's this interesting aspect too of like the deepest way that we have to name it, like, because when I say Neem Karoli Baba, I mean, yeah, sometimes it is a form, like even if it's a form in my mind, like a subtle form, an image of his body, but oftentimes that's just the name of that presence.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still something really sweet in that sense of just recognizing that that our heart kind of has these root names, that there's something that we want to call it, and that's that sense of it's all one, and there's this diversity of expression, and that's also, there's something really rich in that.
Well, bhakti is the devotee longing for union with the one, basically, but it's a duality method, and some people, K.K. Shah, who is our dear mentor who left right after Ram Dass, he didn't want to leave that. That's like Sri Ramakrishna. He didn't want to leave being in that kind of devotional attitude with with Kali. And when someone said, "Hey, I can show you the non-dual, I can give you the essence of that which is beyond all form," he said, "Okay, I'll try." And he immediately went to that place because he was already in that place. And then, but he went, "No," and I want to stay loving Ma. I just want to stay in that. So that's a devotional attitude. And KK used to express it to me all the time. I do all these great Skype at the time, sessions with him where he'd express that. So it's a marvelous thing. It's the gopis. It's so delightful. And Ram Dass played in those fields as well. But at the same time, I think it is good. A little bit of that discrimination about the reality of what we can build around that. And you know what? Trungpa Rinpoche, great Tibetan Lama. So we used to go with Ram Dass because my father had a farm just literally an hour and a half from Tail of the Tiger in Vermont that Trungpa used to spend a lot of time with. And that was the summer after we came back from India, and he used to call us, "Oh yeah, those Ram Dass loving lighters."
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah. Oh, it was so great. We used to laugh about that. Yeah. Oh.
I also think there's something, I thought about this a lot, right? Because in this sense of bhakti and being dualistic, and I've been thinking about it's really only dualistic in the intellectual sense, but like that sense, right, of Ramakrishna wanting to stay in that devotional mood. I mean, that devotional mood is love. I mean, that is that presence, right? So it's like we're utilizing this particular framework, but what it's connecting us to is, I mean, it is that same essence. I mean, it's that essence of love. It's just for a devotee, what's going to excite it more is that kind of devotional love language poetry, which is dualistic. But what it's awakening isn't. And I think about it like that because there is this sense of bhakti path being like lesser in some way. But I think it just works on a different logic model.
I hear you. But I'll tell you what, Roshi Joan Halifax, I did a podcast with her and Duncan Trussell. I believe he was there too. And I asked her about God, you spent all this time with Ram Dass. What about Maharaji? What is, because that's all he refers to all the time. What does he mean? What do you see? And she said, when I look at his picture, she said, all I see, and I look in his eyes, I see emptiness. And Ram Dass had just before that, when asked in another seminar of some sort, what his experience of Maharaji in a similar way, he just started thinking, just of his experience. He went off into that place where he communicated with Maharaji, and then his eyes had drifted, and he went, it's just empty. He said the same thing, empty. And then I think she looked at me and said, yeah, well, eventually, you'll go beyond the duality thing. And I went, are you kidding? You've probably done a gazillion more lifetimes here than you're this Zen Roshi, who is like one of the most courageous, independent, and I mean that not because you talk about independence in the book, which is a whole other thing to talk about. We'd need another podcast just around that, thinking
Sure.
that that's freedom. But it was just her way of relating and opening to it all, and talk about really living in impermanent and uncertainty and accepting that it's very accomplished. And I know you spent time with her too. And she used to come every year, even if she wasn't coming to a retreat, to Ram Dass's. So I just think that she laughed at me, by the way, when I said that. Oh, God.
Yeah.
We don't even have it. We have no choice. It's fun to look at this stuff, but really it's just what happened to you, that great story of the ticket to Maui and all of these events that happened around it. And then you just, at some point you go, okay, all right.
Yeah.
It's okay, whatever you want. And it's funny. Last night, actually, Krishna Das, he does these wonderful Thursday night Zoom things or whatever, live streams. And somebody asked him about faith, his own, I guess. And I'm not quoting verbatim, but it was something like, well, I know Maharaji completely. Everything that I need to become free is happening. And he said, but at the same time, I have total faith that I'm going to screw up every day.
Yeah.
So that I thought, that keeps everything in balance, right? Absolutely.
And what's interesting is, because Ram Dass has talked about this in some of his talks, especially in the 90s, he talks about, because he would do extended Buddhist retreats. I mean, he did all these different practices, right? But for him, he would talk about how he didn't see these as really different, because his core practice was Guru Kripa, which was that for him, whether it was doing Buddhist meditation or singing kirtan, that was his way of, that was just the Guru's grace unfolding in his life as he, grew towards that. And in my time with him at the house, that sense of Guru Kripa, I mean, I felt like that was much more front and center for him. I mean, I remember the time I asked him, like, Ram Dass, what is your practice? Like, what do you do for a practice now? And there was that silence, and he said, I just hang out with Maharaji. That's what he said. And later I heard him say it a little bit, maybe he had thought about it more. He said, I just love everything and hang out with my guru. But yeah, and that's, I think in Guru Kripa, I mean, because that really is that's a really deep and intimate place where kind of that bhakti and that non-dual truth, I mean, they come together, because
right.
You can't talk about, I am speechless now, it's like,
no, but that's it. It's a bullseye. And in fact, the temple, Kenchi, Neem Karoli Baba's temple, was originally on the sign when you went over the bridge there and the arch as you went through. It said, Shri, 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 Neem Karoli Baba, Advait Hanuman Temple. What? Non-dual Hanuman Temple? Right?
Yeah.
And that is it exactly. And the great story of Krishnadas and I were with him. He had a bad knee, and we went over to Kenchi. No, it was in Vrindavan, actually, and we went to the temple. Nobody was supposed to come, but he had a bad, I helped him go over there. He was really in a lot of pain, and Maharaji, did the miracle thing and healed him and all that. It's like Christ kind of a thing, which I don't even think about the story for me, the great story is him looking at Krishnadas's notebook, and he had Mahamudra Buddhist prayer in there, and Maharaji had it translated and said, Bahotacha, very good, he said. Then he flipped the page and there was a picture of him, and he said to Krishnadas and I, who's that? And, very funny, it's you. And Nai, Buddha. And we got that transmission through him by virtue of whoever it was that was the universe, which self-identification, whatever was needed, we got. And whatever wasn't needed that we happened to choose and make radically screwed up mistakes in our lives, it was fodder for transformation. And Fierce Grace, Ram Dass got the ultimate and managed, he gave him the consciousness to be able to love everyone through that pain and through that discomfort and dependence on people. I don't know. We used to bug him all the time about that. And he'd say, well, I wrote a book. How can I help? Now it's a book about how can you help? Yeah. So, it's the bringing together of the reality from the non-dual perspective, which is what Maharaji lived in, and at the same time loved from that place, and had all of the fun in the world with these crazy young hippies who happened to come to him in 1970. Oh boy! Hey, great to hang with you. Hey, nice opportunity.
Really good.
We haven't done this
really good.
in a long time, and everybody from and for God, pick up Sitaram Das's book. I kept telling it, from and to God. I don't know why I thought of that. From and for God. Yeah. So you're going to have a link on the show notes, and to get the book, which helps Ram Dass's, where he lived, has been turned into a sanctuary. And led by Dasima, who took care of Ram Dass for many years, called Hanuman Maui. And this book and whatever proceeds are going there to help support. And God, I hope we get together to be able to see each other in Maui at the end of the year. We'll see.
Yeah, me too.
And we'll have Kripa has a nice Hanuman Chalisa record, which is also part of helping support there, and there'll be a link to that as well.
Yep, absolutely. And the book also, half the proceeds go to Hanuman Maui, and the other half specifically go to Kripa's service outreach work, the work that we're doing in prisons, and and
hopefully that'll all start up again soon. Hopefully.
Yes, hopefully soon. Yeah. Although incarcerated people still have not been given any priority for vaccines.
It's horrible what's going on.
Yeah.
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, somebody used to say.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here, Sitaram Das. This is Mind Rolling on Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com and check out that new Ram Dass course that's coming up in May. And whatever else. We have so many. Mirabai Bush has a new podcast. You should check that out. We have some other great announcements on the Be Here Now Network. So keep an eye out, and we will see you next time. Namaste.
Namaste.